I never meant to fall for my friend's mom. Until one quiet night on her porch, she pulled me close and I froze. I should have stayed away, but I kept going back, and it changed everything. My name is Alex. I'm 34, living in Sacramento, working at an electronics repair shop. It's steady, honest work, the kind that keeps your days full and your mind quiet. For a long time I thought that was fine. I wasn't miserable. I just wasn't awake. Then Connor got hired. Connor was 23, quick with a joke, the kind of person who made the shop feel less like a place you waited to leave. We clicked fast. Same music, same impatience for pointless small talk. We started staying late after closing, talking about nothing and everything while we locked up. About a month in, he said, "Come over this weekend. Meet my friends. We play games. Nothing serious." I said yes because I had no reason to say no. What Connor didn't mention was that his place was his mom's house. I realized it the second I pulled up. Tidy yard, small porch, the kind of place that looked lived in a careful way. Connor opened the door before I finished knocking, talking already, laughing like the day had been waiting for him to show up. And then I stepped inside and saw Diane. She was in the kitchen, relaxed and unhurried. And when she looked up and smiled at me, something in my brain stalled. Not because she tried to impress anyone. It was the opposite. She felt completely herself. Warm, calm, present. Connor said, "Mom, this is my friend Alex." And Diane said, "Hi, Alex," like she'd been curious about me for longer than 10 seconds. I tried to act normal. Connor pulled me into the living room to start the game and I nodded along, but my attention kept drifting back to the kitchen, her moving through it like it was an extension of her. She passed through the room a few times, said something about the volume once, brought us drinks without being asked. When she set mine down, she said, "Connor never tells me anything about his friends. I'm glad you came." Simple words, but the way she said them made it feel like she was talking to me, not at me. Connor caught me looking in her direction and, without even teasing, said quietly, "Just so you know, she's friendly with everyone." I didn't say anything, I told him. "You didn't have to," he said like it was obvious. I laughed it off. I left that night telling myself it was nothing. But the nothing followed me home in my head, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the afternoon had been brighter than it had any right to be. I tried to bury it under common sense. She was my friend's mom. I was a grown man with a job and a routine, not a kid catching feelings because someone smiled at him. I told myself she was just kind. I told myself I was just bored with my own life and grateful for a house that felt warm. But the truth was, I hadn't been looked at like that in a long time. Like I was more than a customer service voice and a pair of hands that fixed things. That single afternoon made my normal life feel a little too quiet. And once you notice the quiet, it's hard to unnotice it. 3 days later, I got a notification on my break. Diane followed me on Instagram. A few seconds after that, she liked a post from 2 months ago, like she'd scrolled back on purpose. I followed her back and told myself it meant absolutely nothing. Except I already knew it meant something. That weekend Connor texted like it was casual. His mom was making baked pasta. I should come by. I went. Diane was in the kitchen wearing an apron, moving between stove and counter with easy confidence. The whole house smelled like garlic and something slow-cooked. She looked up and said, "You're right on time." Like my presence wasn't random, like it belonged. Connor was on the couch. I should have sat with him, but I drifted to the kitchen and asked if she needed help. She handed me plates and told me where the glasses were. We worked side by side, quiet and comfortable like we'd done it before. That was the dangerous part. How quickly new started to feel familiar. Not in a rushed way, in a grounded way, like we were both people who'd had enough of surface-level conversations and were relieved to find someone who didn't ask questions just to fill space. At one point she said softly, "Most of Connor's friends come and go and never really see me, like I'm just part of the house." I said honestly, "That seems hard to do." She glanced at me, held the look a beat, then turned back to what she was doing. "Good answer," she said, and my chest tightened like she just marked something down. Dinner was easy. Connor talking, Diane laughing at the right moments, making the whole room feel lighter without trying. Later, when Connor went upstairs, Diane started clearing plates. I stood to help. She told me I didn't have to. I did anyway. We ended up at the sink together. She said quietly, "I like that you stayed to help. Most people don't." There was a small silence, and then she asked, casual but careful, "That thing you said the first time you came over, about me being more interesting than most people Connor brings around. Did you mean it?" I hadn't even realized she'd heard me clearly, but she had. "Yeah," I said. "I meant it." She nodded slowly, rinsing a glass, and after a moment she said, almost to herself, "It's been a long time since someone said something like that and actually meant it." I didn't know what to say, so I didn't force one. Somehow that was the right choice. When I left, Diane walked me to the door. "You're welcome back anytime, Alex," she said. "Not just when Connor invites you." The sentence sat in my mind the whole drive home. The next week at work was the same on paper. Screens, laptops, customers. Except I kept catching myself replaying her tone, her pauses, the way her eyes held mine a fraction longer than necessary. I watched Connor joke with customers and wondered if I was a bad friend for even thinking about his mom that way. But I hadn't done anything. Neither had she. Two adults had talked in a kitchen. That was all. Still, I started noticing things I hadn't noticed before. The way Connor never hovered when I was there, like he trusted the atmosphere of his own home. The way Diane didn't try to impress anyone, but somehow made the room calmer just by being in it. The way she asked real questions and actually waited for real answers. I'd spent years around people who talked to be heard. Diane talked to understand. And once that started mattering to me, it mattered more every time I went back. Then she commented on one of my posts. Something small, a few words, but it stayed with me longer than it deserved. The following weekend Connor texted again. "Too much soup? Come hang out." When I arrived, Connor was in the garage with a friend. He shouted hello and told me to go inside. "Mom's in the kitchen, there's food." Diane's hair was down when I walked in. It changed her, made her look less like someone managing a home and more like someone simply living in it. She smiled and said she'd made too much again and Connor wouldn't eat enough of it. Like we were already a team making fun of him. I sat at the counter. She set a bowl in front of me and sat across this time, watching my reaction like she actually cared. I made a stupid compliment. "Best soup I've had in this kitchen." And she laughed and said it was specific. I said I was a specific person. Something in her attention shifted, like I'd stepped closer without touching her. We talked. Not small talk. Real questions, how long I'd been doing repair work, whether it was what I'd wanted before life got practical. I answered honestly. She told me she'd spent a lot of her life organizing other people's needs and was only recently learning how to stop. She worked remotely now, had freedom, and was still adjusting to the quiet. "The silence sounds nice," I said. "It is," she replied. "Until it isn't." Connor came in, grabbed soup, said it was good, and went back out. The moment he left, the kitchen quiet returned. Only now it didn't feel accidental. When Connor and his friend left around 6 to grab food, it became just us. We cleared bowls and ended up at the sink again like gravity kept placing us there. Without turning, Diane said, "You came back. You said the door was open," I answered. She dried her hands slowly. "I wasn't sure you'd take that seriously," I admitted. "I've thought about it more than I should." She turned to face me fully. No quick glance, no polite smile. "Me too," she said. We stood close enough that I could have reached for her. I didn't. I wanted to. She knew. I knew she knew. In my head, warnings lined up fast. This was Connor's home. This was Connor's mother. This was the kind of situation that could turn into gossip, then into damage, even if nobody meant for it to. I could picture Connor's face if he ever connected the dots, and the thought made my stomach drop. But the other truth sat right next to the fear. Diane wasn't playing with me. There was no cheap flirtation, no games. She looked like someone who'd been alone in a quiet way for a long time, and who was careful because she didn't want to hurt anyone. That made it harder to lie to myself about what this was becoming. After a long beat, she took a small step back, like she was choosing restraint instead of pretending she didn't feel anything. You should probably head out, she said gently. Before Connor gets back and starts asking questions neither of us are ready to answer. I nodded because she was right. At the door she called my name. I turned. Next time, she said. Just come in. You don't have to knock. I drove home with my mind louder than the road. A few days later Connor mentioned, casual as ever, that he was going to his grandmother's for a few days. He said it while putting on his jacket like he was talking about the weather. Mom's home, he added. If you ever need to drop anything off. He didn't look at me when he said it. Then he walked out, and I stood in the shop wondering whether he knew more than he was letting on or whether I was turning everything into a puzzle. I didn't go that night. I drove around, told myself I was decompressing, went home, made food, stared at a screen and absorbed none of it. I lay in bed thinking about a front door I'd been told I didn't need to knock on. By Thursday, I ran out of excuses. After my shift, I found myself driving the route that led to her street. I parked and sat there until my heart felt tired of arguing. Then I got out, walked up to the door, and without knocking, turned the handle and stepped inside. Diane was in the kitchen with the radio on low, stirring something on the stove. She didn't jump when she saw me. She looked at me for one still second and her face softened, like she'd been holding something in place and could finally set it down. I was starting to think you changed your mind, she said. I almost did, I admitted. She nodded like she respected the honesty, then turned back to the stove. You're staying for dinner, she said. Not a question. I sat at the counter and watched her cook. What struck me wasn't the food or the warmth of the kitchen. It was that she didn't perform. She didn't flirt in an obvious way. She didn't try to be anything other than herself. And that made the whole moment feel more real than anything I'd had in a long time. At one point she said, without turning fully toward me, before anything happens, I need to know you understand what this could do. To Connor. I do, I said immediately. That's why I didn't come the first night he left town. I drove past your street like it was a test I kept failing. She let out a quiet laugh that sounded more like relief than amusement. Good, she said, because I'm not interested in ruining my son's life. And I'm not interested in ruining yours either. Then we don't, I said. Not recklessly. She finally turned, meeting my eyes fully. And if it gets messy? I swallowed. Then we handle it like adults. We don't make Connor carry our choices. She held my gaze for a moment, then nodded once, like she was accepting a promise she didn't want to ask for but needed to hear. We talked while she cooked, work, small frustrations, the kind of show she started and quit, plans for the garden she kept putting off. She handed me a glass of water like it was normal for me to be there, like I belonged in that quiet rhythm. When dinner was ready, she sat next to me at the counter, close enough that I was aware of every shift of her shoulder. The conversation slowed, got careful. She asked me what I actually wanted from my life. Not what I did, but what I wanted. I told her the honest version. That the repair shop was fine, but I didn't want it to be my whole story, that I'd been delaying decisions until delay became a habit. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, I did that for most of my 30s. You wait for the right moment, and one day you realize waiting was a choice. I asked her when she figured that out. Recently, she said, and the word held weight. A little later she said, I like that you talk to me like a person. You are a person, I said. She laughed, real laugh, not polite. You'd be surprised how often people forget that. We stayed at the counter long after we finished eating. The radio changed songs. Outside, the house grew quieter. She asked me, Can I ask you something honest? I said yes. The first time you came here, she asked, when you saw me in the kitchen, what did you actually think? I looked at her and decided not to hide behind jokes. I thought you were the most naturally striking person I'd seen in a long time, I said, and I spent the next 10 minutes trying to remember how to behave normally. She was quiet, then smiled. I noticed you trying. The tension broke into a small laugh between us, and something underneath it steadied. This isn't something I do, she said. Just so you know. I didn't think it was, I told her. She admitted, I'm not entirely sure what this is. Me neither, I said. She looked down at her hands and then back up. But it doesn't feel like nothing. No, I agreed. It doesn't. At the sink afterward, side by side again, she said quietly, I haven't felt like this in a very long time, and I want to be careful with it. I said, I want to be careful too. She studied my face like she was making a decision. Come back Saturday, she said. I will. At the door she said my name, and when I answered, she said, I'm glad you didn't knock. Saturday came too fast. Connor was home when I arrived, completely normal, like there was no new gravity in the air. He grabbed chips and disappeared into a game. Diane appeared a few minutes later, simple clothes, calm expression, greeting me like I was supposed to be there. The afternoon ran in the usual rhythm. Connor playing, Diane moving around the house, me in the living room pretending I was watching the screen. But every time I drifted into the kitchen for water or to check on dinner, something tightened between Diane and me. Not loud, just real. The way her hand passed me a glass. The way she said my name. The way she paused half a second longer than the moment required. Connor either didn't notice or chose not to. Once, when Connor stepped out to grab something from his car, Diane passed me in the hallway and her fingers brushed my sleeve. Light, quick, like an accident. But when she reached the end of the hall, she didn't keep walking right away. She paused, just long enough for me to feel the message. I'm here. I'm still choosing careful. I'm still choosing you. When Connor came back in, he was the same, laughing about something on his phone, asking what was for dessert, while my entire nervous system acted like it had been plugged into a live wire. After dinner, Connor stepped outside to take a call. Diane started cleaning up and I joined her automatically. At the counter she said softly, You're quieter today. I've got a lot on my mind, I said. About this? She asked. About all of it. She set down the glass she'd been drying and turned to face me. I've been thinking too, she said. I waited. I don't want this to cause damage, she said. Not to Connor. Not to you. Not to me. I understand, I said, and I meant it. She took a breath. But I can't pretend I want it to stop. I looked at her, and there was nothing indirect about either of us anymore. Then let's be careful, I said. Both of us. Together. She nodded once. Okay. Connor came back in and the room snapped back into its normal version. But the agreement stayed. When I left, Connor walked me to the porch himself. He paused and said, You're over here a lot these days. You keep inviting me, I said, trying to sound casual. He thought for a second, then shrugged. Yeah. Ido. He almost said more. Then he didn't. Drive safe. I sat in my car afterwards staring at the kitchen light through the window, thinking about what Connor didn't say and what Diane and I had just said without witnesses. The weeks after that didn't turn into chaos. That's important. We weren't reckless. It wasn't frantic. It had a pace that felt surprisingly steady, like something that had been building under the surface finally found a place to be real. Diane texted sometimes, practical things, small check-ins, and every so often something honest that made my chest go tight. I replied. When I came over, we talked the way we had been. Real questions, real answers, both of us careful not to lie to ourselves. We also set quiet boundaries. We didn't act like a secret in front of Connor. We didn't change the tone of the house when he was in the room. If we needed a minute, we found it the way people find minutes in real life. By taking out the trash, by rinsing a dish, by stepping onto the porch to check the lights. It wasn't romantic in a movie way. It was adult. It was responsibility sitting right next to want. And the strange thing was, the responsibility didn't kill the feeling. It sharpened it. Every time we chose restraint, it proved we weren't doing this because we were careless. We were doing it because it kept coming back, even when we tried to put it down. One evening Connor was out late, and Diane called instead of texting. When I got there, she was on the back porch with a blanket and 2 mugs of tea. The yard was quiet, string lights along the fence making the darkness feel softer. He sat beside her. After a while she rested her head on my shoulder, like it was the most natural thing. This is a strange situation, she said. It is, I agreed. But it doesn't feel strange when we're in it, she added. No, I said. It feels like the most normal part of my week. She laughed softly. That's either sweet or alarming. Probably both. She lifted her head and looked at me. I looked back. We were close and neither of us moved away. She said my name once just to say it, and then she kissed me. Not hurried, not uncertain, present, like something that had been on its way for weeks and finally arrived. When we pulled back, she stared out at the yard for a moment, steadying herself. I'm not going to pretend I know where this goes, she said. Me neither. But right now, she said, I'm not sorry. Neither am I answered. And it was the truest thing I'd said in a long time. We stayed on that porch for another hour, talking about her garden plans, about a road trip she took alone years ago when she needed to clear her head, about fears I'd carried through my 20s and which ones had actually mattered. Mostly we talked the way two people do when they feel safe. Not trying to win, not trying to hide. Months passed. Connor eventually moved out with friends. He and I stayed in touch, but our daily overlap faded. He never confronted me. He never asked the question I was afraid of. I don't know exactly what he suspected. I just know there were moments where his eyes lingered like he saw more than he said. Diane and I kept finding our way to each other. Not in a dramatic way. In a real way. Some evenings we cooked together, side by side at the stove, passing things back and forth without asking. Some weekends we drove to small towns where no one knew us and walked around like we were just two people. No story trailing behind us, no explanations needed. One evening on the drive back from one of those trips, Diane looked out at the dark fields and said, I spent so much of my life waiting to feel like this. Like what? I asked. She smiled, small and honest. Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I kept my eyes on the road. I know what you mean, I said, because I did. I don't know how to wrap it up neatly because it didn't end in a neat way. Real things rarely do. What I can tell you is that for a long time I thought I understood the shape of my life, work, routine, a ceiling I never questioned. And then I walked through a front door on a Sunday afternoon and saw a woman in her kitchen, and suddenly the world was bigger than I'd been living in. I'm not telling you this story because it's simple. I'm telling you because it's true, and because I think a lot of people live inside what they expected and never notice what else is waiting at the edge of it. She told me once, very quietly, that it felt too good to be true. I told her that was exactly how you know it's real, and I meant every word of it.